Well, the Omicron coronavirus variant has led to a new wave of restrictions being announced across the United Kingdom. In Northern Ireland, nightclubs will have to close from Boxing Day, and Scotland will impose restrictions on hospitality and household mixing from the 27th of December. Wales has moved to COVID alert level 2, meaning the rule of 6 is coming back for pubs and restaurants, and large house parties will be banned too. So should England follow suit? What does the data say? Well, let's speak to Dr. Andrew Lilico now, the Executive Director of Europe Economics, a leading economic consultancy, and someone who's become prolific online as a really quite accurate armchair epidemiologist. Welcome to the programme, Andrew. And I gather you're recovering from Omicron yourself. First of all, are you feeling OK?
Yes, not too bad. I'm just about recovered. I think you had it yourself a week or two back.
That's right. I think just about every single person in the country is going to get it over the next few weeks. The question is, will we all get it at the same time? And if we do, what kind of risk does that pose to the NHS?
Well, if everybody got it at the same time, then the NHS would come under some pressure. I don't think it's very likely that we're all going to get it at the same time. From the data at the moment, it seems to be clear that the wave has peaked, at least for now, in much the same way as happened in South Africa. Or if not actually peaked, it's very flat at the moment. Maybe has peaked in London, and the reality is that the evidence seems to be that Omicron's a little bit milder overall, and in particular it's milder in respect of when people end up going to hospital, they stay there for less time. So that means that when we begin at the moment with far fewer people in hospital with COVID than we had, say, a year ago, and that means that there's quite a lot of scope for us to have quite a lot of additional hospitalizations before we get too much pressure on the NHS. And if we add into the mix there that a lot of those hospitalizations might be for quite a short period of time, then that's very helpful for the ability to bear hospitalization burden overall.
What we've seen with the other administrations in the United Kingdom, with Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, not imposing restrictions for Christmas, but imposing restrictions thereafter. Do you think that's going to look like an error as we move forward, or is it just too early to say?
I think it's fairly clearly an error. The time when there was potentially an issue was the intergenerational mixing at Christmas. I mean, presumably, I would have thought that the whole point of any restrictions or advice or anything that you did should have been to minimise the risk that you had very large numbers of young people who then suddenly all mixed with who were sick, who mixed with older people, and then those older people got it. So I would have been advising the older people to be shielding probably for the past week or two already, and for other people to have put back their meeting with older people into the new year. And that's what I'm doing. For example, I'm not meeting my mother until into the new year. And I would have thought that was pretty much common sense. I find the idea that you encourage everybody to meet at Christmas, and then you don't don't try to encourage any kind of smoothing of that process, but then you say we're going to have restrictions after the point at which the maximum danger has passed, just seems very peculiar to me as an idea. It's exactly the wrong way around.
Entered the worst of both worlds, or at least 3/4 of the United Kingdom have entered the worst of both worlds and have got this completely the wrong way round. I wonder if this means that now England will not go into any of these restrictions. I suppose this depends on what the epidemiological picture looks like. I suppose the argument is that things have turned a corner in London because no one's going out to the cinema, no one's going out to the theatre, restaurant bookings are being cancelled. We've seen this across the news over the last week. It's taken a very hard hit on hospitality. No one is really going out and mixing. Is that the reason why we seem to have turned a corner in infections?
I mean, it will be part of it. I suspect that the working from home is quite a large element as well. When we've had past waves, London has been particularly effective at changing its behaviour. Some combination of voluntary changes and government-mandated effects having large effects in London itself. London tends to be able to adjust its behaviour a bit more than other parts of the country and a bit more rapidly. It has a large capacity for people to work from home, and once you eliminate things like some of the commuting or moving around on the heavily packed public transport, that has quite a large effect on R. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that everywhere we'll be able to adjust things as rapidly as London has done. But I think that that's clearly a significant part of what's going on here. Some of that would have happened anyway. I mean, the main time when people do all of their sort of partying is a little bit earlier in December. So it might be that some of that would have softened off. Certainly would have softened off once you come into the Christmas period itself. And a lot of people move out of London and go and visit relatives in other parts of the country, things like that. So I think quite a lot of that was sort of baked into the process or anyway. But I agree that that's a large element of what's going on. Now, the thing about that is, does that mean that once we get into the new year, then we're going to have some new wave? Well, we might have a bit. I mean, I don't think that's that likely. But suppose that we did. I don't think that that's particularly problematic, because the thing with Omicron wasn't that the virus itself, given our very high levels of vaccination, and in fact, it turns out it seems to be intrinsically milder as well, it wasn't that it was a particularly dangerous virus in terms of how harmful it was. The danger of it was that everyone was going to get infected at the same time. But what's happened now is we had a load of people infected, and if we've now taken the peak off, such that this peak is going to come nowhere near threatening the overwhelming of the NHS, we'd have to have a very strange thing happened subsequently for us to end up with enough more people infected once we came into the new year to really create any kind of problem. And I think that that's very unlikely. It seems to me that if we've seen the peak occur in London, if we've really seen that, as opposed to it being something like people not wanting to test ahead of Christmas or something like that, if we've really seen the peak in infections already, it seems very unlikely to me that we could have a serious peak that was 6 or 8 times higher once we came into January. I just don't think that that's plausible at all on the numbers.
So just quickly and lastly now, you expect that there'll be no need for further restrictions in England, and it could well be that England's played this just about all right, and the rest of the United Kingdom ends up looking a little bit silly with restrictions.
Yes, so I think that we've come close to doing the right thing in England through some combination of happenstance and political processes. And I think that we will tough it out, and I think it'll be okay. I think other parts of the country seem to have got it slightly wrong. I doubt they've got it disastrously wrong, but we'll see what they actually do. Another thing I think is worth noting is that in England, some of these things, for example, even with, say, COVID status passports, those kinds of measures that came in with Plan B, those seem likely now to be, at least the intention seems to be for them to come in February. And by then, Omicron will have gone. And so I don't think any of that will ever happen. I think that will just seem like an irrelevance once the measure actually comes to the time when it was going to be introduced. And none of that, actually, kind of half of Plan B is never even going to happen at all.
Well, really interesting analysis there. Dr. Andrew Lilico, thank you for joining us this morning on The Briefing, and happy Christmas.